We welcome you and everybody to another installment of Fielding the 68 brought to you by Rhythm. I'm Faxon Childress alongside Lukas Harkins and Rocco Miller. A lot to cover today over the course of the show as we will be doing a full bracket reveal here on the program. Excited to break down the full bracket. Obviously, we've had some movement on the one line, a lot of stuff going on between the seeds 3, 4, and 5. And then the bubble picture is as tantalizing as ever. So we're going to break everything down for you guys. Rocco, Lukas, appreciate you guys joining the show as always. Before we dive right into the full bracket reveal, we do got to talk about what happened this past weekend in college hoops. And Rocco, we can cue you up first for the biggest winners of this past weekend. It was an action-packed slate.
It sure was, Faxon. Great to be on with you and Lukas as well. I think you have to start with the two obvious ones. The shot, heard around the SEC, sent Tennessee into the winner's circle in a very evenly matched game against Alabama. Two of our Elite Six we've been talking about in play for our number one seed. And, with Tennessee's remaining schedule, they could not have been a one seed without that win. And so with that being said, the Vols are in position right now. We'll see where they land today to be able to get to the one seed with that win. And obviously just so huge. It sent Alabama to their sixth loss. They now have the most amount of losses out of the six serious contenders. And so that was huge. And then Michigan State being the other one. Now, Michigan State didn't really move anywhere for me. But what they did with another key win over Wisconsin at home was survive a 5-game gauntlet going 5-0. And they're so well entrenched now as a number 2 seed, it's really hard to envision them falling much because a lot of the teams just below them keep interchanging and taking losses. So at 19-5 in their meaningful games and 10-3 in quad 1 with 5 high-level quad 1A wins, the Spartans are as solid as they've ever been. And next, I would say South Alabama. Friday night was absolutely insane. I don't know if you were tracking the Sun Belt. But we had a 4-way tie for first after James Madison lost a late overtime game against Texas State. South Alabama ends up getting all of the tiebreakers, and they are your number 1 seed in the Sun Belt tournament. And finally, the other obvious one is Xavier. Xavier needs to just keep winning. They get Creighton at home. Not only do they beat Creighton, but they thumped them. Congrats to the Musketeers. I think we will see their name today.
Yeah, it's some good stuff. And then obviously, January, February, Izzo, they're showing up and they seem to be trending up at the right time are the Spartans in East Lansing. Lukas, we welcome you into the program. Walk us through some of the teams that were winners from this past weekend, and then we'll give you first dibs on some of the teams that saw their stock drop as well.
Yeah, I think the one I'll add to the winners is Illinois. Winning in Ann Arbor yesterday. I think that's the kind of win that gets them off kind of that projected 8-9 line. I think that especially this season, it's looking particularly important to want to avoid those 1 seeds in the second round with how strong the top line looks this season. I think Illinois' win there puts them up towards my 7 line. And I think that's going to be a really valuable spot for Illinois to be at. As far as losers, you can name a lot of bubble teams in there. Arkansas, Texas, SMU. A bunch of teams took losses down the stretch here that are certainly important. I think that's where you're starting to see a little bit of a creep up from teams like VCU or UC San Diego or Boise State, teams that we've discussed as being bubble teams if they're needing at-larges or teams more as a 12-11. You might even see VCU or San Diego or Drake climb their way up towards a 10-11 more so than 11-12.
Yeah, good stuff there as always, Lukas. And before we dive into the meat and bones here of the bracket, anything else from this past weekend that you feel like is of note, maybe from a bubble team, and maybe from a team that has played their way into a different seed line before we get into the full review?
Yeah, for me, I'll say – I'm sorry, who was that too?
Oh, no, Rocco, you can go first.
Okay, yeah, no worries. Along with Lucas's theme, I would say Nebraska losing at home to Minnesota. They're all of a sudden in the danger zone. They were looking really solid just like 2 or 3 game days ago. Now they've lost, I think, 3 straight, and they find themselves barely in my projection on Bracketeer.org. But yeah, Nebraska is a team that can ill afford. That's 3 subpar home losses. They've lost at home to Rutgers, USC. Now they add Minnesota to the cluster. And it's getting real dicey in Lincoln, despite their road wins at Oregon and Creighton. And then I would also say Oklahoma wasn't mentioned yet. I think that one's quite obvious. They're sitting there at 4-12 in the SEC. Obviously, perfect in non-conference. If they are going to shatter any kind of new barrier, they have to go 2-0 this week, and I think Oklahoma's in deep trouble.
And for me, I look at it from the opposite perspective of things. With if you're going to have these teams that we've had projected in the field for a long time lose these games, someone has to climb up and take those spots. And so far, this team isn't there yet. But Colorado State's a team I'm still monitoring. Absolutely dominated Utah State this weekend, 27-point home win. They still get Boise State on the road in the regular season finale, which would be another chance for a quadrant 1 win. They're just 1-5 in those games so far, but 7-7 against the upper 2 quadrants. Their metrics are now closing in on the top 60 across the board. With the opportunities there to still get Boise State, and then the opportunities that would present themselves in the Mountain West Tournament, whether that be Utah State again, San Diego State, Boise State, New Mexico. I don't think Colorado State's a team that's quite out of the mix yet. All they've lost to since January 5th, since the new year flipped to 2025, is SDSU, New Mexico, and Utah State, all of them on the road. They've really been passing the tests for the past 2 months. If that continues over the final 2 weeks, they still have a shot at an at-large.
Yeah, it feels like Nico Medved's group's playing their best ball of the season at the perfect time. We'll see if they can rally the troops down the stretch and try and get an at-large. It might still be in need of some help, as you alluded to, Lukas, and some teams continuing to lose above them. Let's hop right into things here now, and we can start in Atlanta, Georgia, with the South Region. It is time for our full bracket reveal here on Field in the 68, folks. You won't want to miss any of this, so make sure you stay parked right here on Field in the 68. Let's hop into it. 1 seed in the South Region in Atlanta, Georgia is going to be Bruce Pearl and the Auburn Tigers. They'll play the winner of Southern and Bucknell. And in the 8-9 matchup, 2 of the best coaches in college basketball, Mick Cronin versus Greg McDermott. That's going to be a heck of an 8-9 between UCLA and Creighton. Rocco, we can go to you first here in this pod. What are your thoughts on these 4 teams?
Yeah, I think I'm pretty close to the exact same. I think it shows how close everything is, all the way from a 5 to a 9 seed at this point. UCLA and Creighton certainly have solid victories in their resumes, but of course, Creighton is getting blown out. That sunk them from an 8 to a 9 over the weekend. In UCLA's case, you could argue them as high as a 6 right now. They do have some great. They have the road win at Oregon. They have some other great wins away from Pauley Pavilion, but they're also just 6-8 away from Pauley Pavilion. And it's close. There's going to be, as Lukas kind of hinted at earlier, like with Illinois' case, there's a lot of other good teams we'll talk about as the show goes on. But we're going to end up with really good teams at like UCLA's level on the 8 line, no matter what, because somebody has to lose those comparisons. And so the Bruins not only land on the 8 line, but I don't think Mick Cronin's going to be too excited about seeing A, Creighton in the first round, and B, potentially Auburn in the second round.
Yeah, this would be a beyond brutal draw for UCLA, who's obviously having another good year. And seems like after Mick called out the team in that post-game press conference, things have turned around and they're playing harder and they're playing good ball. But this would not be a reward by any means in the 8-9 matchup or with the 1 seed. Lukas, we'll throw it to you for the next pod in the next 4 teams. Taking a look at who the 4 and the 5 are going to be. It's Buzz Williams and the Texas A&M Aggies facing off against a really good Akron team that was undefeated for a long time in MAC play. They're the 13 seed. And then you got Marquette going up against Liberty, 2 teams with 22-plus wins. Marquette has been waning down the stretch a little bit, but got a big win this past weekend to kind of bounce back and right the ship. Lukas, how do you see this pod?
Yeah, starting with Texas A&M, I think they're a team that's certainly dropped. I think this is the lowest we've had them in some time. 4-game losing streak since the bracket preview. I think they've been kind of the victim as well as themselves losing, but also of teams like Michigan State, St. John's. They kind of continue to win games and climb their way up the seed list themselves. As we already hinted at, Michigan State being a pretty rock-solid 2 seed right now, and St. John's moved itself up into that 3 seed mix for me. So Texas A&M has dropped from that maybe projected 2 seed line down to a 4. As for Marquette, I've had Marquette trending along the 6 for a bit now, but I was doing some extra thinking on it for this update, and obviously we agreed as a group on the 5 seed. And that's looking back at the bracket preview, had them and Michigan State as those teams that the committee mentioned as the first 5 seeds, or what would have been the first 5 seeds. And quite frankly, since the bracket preview, they're 3-1. The only loss was at Villanova. I think that they're probably going to stay in that 5 seed spot by the committee. I don't think there's really been enough to jump them, although there are certainly a bunch of teams, as Rocco indicated, 5 through 9, that are extremely close right now. And I think I would even extend that down towards halfway through the 4 line. So Marquette's a team that could potentially get up there still if they play well down the stretch. But I think right now, the fact that they've played rock solid since the bracket preview where they were projected to be a 5 probably keeps them right there. As for the mid-majors here, if you're looking for one of those non-potential at-large contenders, we talk about VCU, UC San Diego, and Drake as the at-large contenders in the 11-12s. The best non-contender there is Liberty. They're unlikely to get an at-large bid. They're not on the board for that. But a top 75 KenPom team that feels like they're going to get a 12 or a 13, that's going to be a dangerous group.
Yeah, a lot of good stuff there as always. Lukas, we're going to take a look now at our next pod here in a South region that's shaping up to be loaded as the 3 seed reveal is Texas Tech going up against the Grizzlies of Montana in the 3-14 matchup, and then the Ole Miss Rebels against the Indiana Hoosiers. Maybe one of the most storylines possible in a matchup there between the Rebels and the Hoosiers. Rocco, how are we seeing this pod of teams?
Yeah, I think you're talking about Chris Beard, but that's funny.
Yeah,
I think, Ole Miss, they keep just sliding into the 7 line on my end, so I think the other guys are a little higher. It's really tricky because they haven't been able, outside of the win at Alabama, which is a massive win for them, they got swept in the Egg Bowl, which I have Mississippi State close to them, so it's really difficult for me to have them vault Mississippi State. They also have a loss to Memphis, who's right in their neighborhood on the seed list. And I think the other thing against Ole Miss right now is they're 5-9 in quad 1, whereas these other teams around them are either 500 or really close. And so they're a really hard team to seed. I certainly don't have an argument with them landing at 6. I just I spent a little too much time on it, as you can tell today. But yeah, so we'll see where they land. Obviously, Indiana, another big story here, not having to go to Dayton. I had them as the best team in Dayton, so I'm okay with this. They're still an 11 seed. I think Hoosier fans would appreciate not having to play that extra game in Dayton and just go straight in. So that would be, and of course we have all the storylines written for themselves. And by the way, for the audience, we go through the exercise the same way, step by step as the committee. And a lot of times the bracket itself and through all the different rules involved will provide us just these great matchups without us having to be artificial at all. So this is another example of that. And then you have Texas Tech on the other side of the bracket. Of course, some great history with Bobby Knight going to Texas Tech. Could see a Texas Tech Indiana second round Bobby Knight game. So that's exciting. Montana hanging on right now due to some tiebreakers, but they did lose on Saturday. Tied for first with Northern Colorado. I think either of those teams are strong enough to stay as a 14, but keep your eye on the Big Sky race as we go forward.
Yeah, and we know the Big Sky tournament can always get chaotic as well, so interested to see how that shakes out as we are about to wrap up things in the South region, and we'll throw it back to you, Lukas, before we do kind of a general recap on the region. Pat Kelsey and the Cardinals as the 7, Mike White and the Bulldogs as the 10 after 2 back-to-back huge wins for Georgia, Michigan State, and Central Connecticut in the 2-15. Lukas, what do you see here as we round out the South region?
Yeah, with Louisville, kind of to the same point as Rocco on the Mississippi State, Mississippi kind of conversation. There's a lot of teams here on the 6-7 lines that are really close, and you're kind of splitting hairs in some capacities. And for Louisville, I dropped them down to the 7 in relative to those others because they don't have a Quadrant 1A win. Their overall record is fantastic, but they don't have that top-end win that some of these other teams have. For instance, Mississippi has 3 such wins. Mississippi State has 3 such wins. I think that's what puts them as the 7 right now. For me, although they've been playing great, really all they have to do is avoid landmines down the stretch, and they're certainly going to be able to do that. That's all they've done basically for the last 2 months is take care of business. So the odds that they will continue to take care of business in the ACC, I feel pretty likely about. As for Georgia, road win at Texas does a lot of things there to kind of push them over the edge. And then you're looking at Michigan State on the 2 line. I think the thing for Michigan State with me is to Rocco's point of them being rock solid on the 2. The thing about that is I think they put themselves kind of in their own tier on the 2 seed line. In that, like, they aren't really in that Auburn, Duke, Houston, Alabama, Tennessee, Florida group, but they're still, I think, a significant margin ahead of the other teams that could contend for the last 2 seed after them and the 3 seed line. I think they've kind of put themselves in a tier of themselves.
I think that's accurate analysis as always. Lucas, Rocco, we'll throw it to you and then back to Lucas before we go to the East Region. Any other comments on teams that may have not been in your pod, or specifically Rocco, before we move on from the South Region?
I guess I just have one other thought on Ole Miss. Ole Miss finishes with a home Tennessee and road Florida game this week. A win in either of those games is probably going to get them a 6 or higher. If they go 0-2, which they might be favored to do, I think 7 or worse for the Rebels. So they've got everything in front of them this week, a huge week for them.
Definitely a huge week for Ole Miss. Lucas, throwing things back to you before we shift gears to the East Region. Anything else to add from the teams we saw in our South Region?
Yeah, I think Rocco had Indiana as his top team in Dayton and has them as an 11 seed, and I think I'm right on board with that. They were my first team out of Dayton. They were my last 11 seed that wasn't going to Dayton. So I think we are just one spot away from each other there on the curve. I think that's where Indiana is right now in terms of they're pretty solidly as an 11, I think, right now. But I think Dayton or not is a really tight battle coming into the last little stretch here of Big Ten play.
All right, let's take a look at our East Region reveal, or let's take a look at our West Region reveal now. We're going to go out to San Francisco, actually, not going to Newark yet. That'll be in the next segment. So we're going to take a look at our West Region reveal now. And starting with the 1 seed, Lucas, since Rocco got first dibs last time, we'll give you the floor for the 1 seed. Alabama, Omaha, and then talk about storylines. I don't even have to say anything about BYU, Utah State. That would be an electric matchup. Lucas, walk us through what you see out in San Francisco to start the West Region.
Yeah, let's start with what is a basically impossible decision at this point, which is Tennessee versus Alabama for a 1 seed. As a group, I guess we went with Alabama for the 1 seed. I would assume, based on Rocco's reaction, that he had Tennessee on the 1 line, and I think that's the other 2 of us probably went with Alabama. For me, that was strength of schedule related. I think they just had enough of an edge there in terms of quality wins in total, 17 in quadrant 1 and 2 versus 14 for Tennessee, and having played a tougher schedule to this point in the season. Gives Alabama the edge for me. On the 8-9 line, BYU continues to play just ridiculously well down the stretch of the season. They pick up a home win over West Virginia by 21 over the weekend. They're a team that you're going to see maybe a different shift in where they're going to be seed line-wise based on location and regions. In this case, they can be on the 8 line, but they could be as high as a 7. They could see them drop a seed line or 2 based on being able to needing to play on Thursday, Saturday. As for Utah State, I mentioned earlier, Colorado State getting that 27-point home win. That's a 27-point road loss there for Utah State, and that's the kind of thing that drops them down, especially in their metrics, drops them closer to potentially double-digit seed territory. Though I still think they have an edge to land in the 8-9 game over some of those teams that are still sitting closer to the bubble.
Let's take a look at our next 4 teams, and we'll throw to Rocco for these 4. We got Arizona against a high-point offense that is really electric. There might be 200 points in that one. And then Missouri versus the winner of Ohio State and Xavier. Rocco, what say you? And I know you've been pretty opinionated on this Ohio State team for the majority of the season.
Well, yeah, none of my stuff is based on opinion. It's based on what I think the committee is going to do. So it's a psychiatry type of exercise. Just to be clear, and I don't think there's any precedent to put Ohio State in currently. However, if they go 2-0 this week, they get both Nebraska and Indiana. They're 2 bubble friends in the Big Ten. If they beat them both, they're going to have the record it takes to get in. But if they even split, we'll be right back in the same boat next Monday. So I can't even emphasize enough how big it is they win both of those. And then for Xavier, they were kind of flip-flopped for me and Lucas with Indiana, so I have no problem with this. They were my first team just clearing Dayton. I thought their overall numbers at the end of beating Creighton pretty badly got them above Indiana, but no harm, no foul. They certainly have flaws in their resume still in terms of quad 1 record and, road records, et cetera. So and at least, hey, you get this amazing matchup, Ohio State, Xavier in our world. Obviously, playing in Dayton sells a lot of. It's going to be hard to get a ticket in there for this one. And then you got the winner of that game playing Missouri, and so Missouri is a team that I'm very high on. If anybody from the 4 or 5 range can get to the Final Four, I think this team can do it. I saw them live down in Athens when they put it on the Bulldogs. They've had some great performances, especially when they won at Florida. Really anxious to see what their draw will be. Selection Sunday will be live here on Fielding the 68 that day. Make sure you tune into that. And then on the Arizona side, I agree. I had Arizona still squeezing into this top 16. It works out very nicely because this probably sends the Wildcats to Seattle. I'm from Seattle. I know there's a lot of Wildcats up there. They would love to see them play there the first 2 rounds and then come on down here to San Francisco. But they have their hands full in round 1 because High Point is on an absolute tear right now. And they are not just winning games. They are winning almost 20 points every time out. They have a Power 5, starting 5. I think their top 7 guys are probably Power 5 good. And that would be a very dangerous matchup for the Wildcats.
Yeah, that would definitely be dangerous. And we know High Point can get up and down and score with some of the best of them in the country. Lukas, throwing things back to you now as we're going to take a look at our next pod here in the West Region. Kentucky and then South Alabama, who Rocco alluded to earlier, actually won that funky tiebreaker to take the 1 seed. And then Maryland and VCU as the 6-11. Lukas, what do you see in this pod?
Yeah, I had Kentucky as my top 4 seed today, so the rest of the group must have them on the 3 line today. Hard to argue with that either. 9 Quadrant 1 wins, 6 of which are in Quadrant 1A. I still think they have the quality to really push themselves into that mix still as a 3 seed. When you look at the top-end wins that they have this season compared to other teams around them, I think that gives them an edge. Maryland continues to play really well, really strong. I could see them up as high as a 5 seed right now, 6-6 in Quadrant 1. They don't have a bad loss on the resume. They're up to top 15 across quality metrics. That's a team that's going to be in really good shape in that respect. As for VCU, I think this is an important one. VCU right now is our projected automatic bid from the A10, I believe. But as I think Rocco would probably agree with me. Right now, they're a team that I think I would still have on the right side of the cut line, even if they were an at-large. And I think their schedule sets up well for them to continue doing so because they still finish, as long as they take care of Duquesne on the road, then they finish with Dayton at home, which would be a Quadrant 2 game. But they have been tremendous at home this season. They haven't lost a home game. The odds are that they would take that home game, which would be another Quad 2 victory, going into the A10 tournament, at which point they'd be 8-4 against the upper 2 quadrants with top 30 quality metrics. I think that's a group that gets in so long as it doesn't really have a bad A10 tournament performance. I think that they're in good position to potentially earn that large bid should they need it.
Yeah, good stuff as always, Lukas. And we're going to conclude the West Region with you, Rocco. Take a look at these last 4 teams as a part of our full bracket reveal. Mississippi State headed out west to face a 10-seed Baylor, another one of those teams that's kind of been in decline as of late. And then Wisconsin and Towson in the 2-15. What do you see, Rocco?
Yeah, I think Mississippi State's another, just like their neighbors in the Egg Bowl rivalry, Ole Miss, is very hard to seed as well. They have the sweep over Ole Miss. They've won at Memphis. Those are 2 teams they're being directly compared against. That win at Vanderbilt they got has aged very nicely. And now their win at Georgia means more than it did a week ago. So I love those 4 road wins to go along with, the solid work they've done otherwise at home. Home wins aren't as impressive to me. I think winning on the road is the most important thing. And they're 7-8 in Quad 1, so I guess that's a knock, just slightly under 500, but they're pretty solid everywhere else. I love the 10-5 overall record away from Starkville. They lost to Lucas's Butler Bulldogs. That's the one blemish. But besides that, they've been pretty solid all season long. I think one of the things they didn't do is get one of those big-time wins, so you see a lot of losses right at the top of their resume. But after that, they're very solid. And Baylor, I talked about a lot last Friday, but, they're teetering on the edge of disaster. They're probably one of my last teams in the field, to be honest. But what ends up happening once you have them in the field like we do, like I do, is you then start seeding the teams. They're in a great position seed-wise because they're still top 30 as a overall body of work. But I'll tell you what, this last 6 games without Josh Ajanuwu, they've been a different team. They're 2-4. They lost to Cincinnati. They lost to Colorado, and they didn't look good in the Oklahoma State win, but they got the win. They only had 10 points in the first 12 minutes at home against Oklahoma State. This team looks way different than before, and I got to see something from them. They have a huge finish. They play at TCU, who they already lost to at home, and they got to end the year at home against Houston. If they don't get a win this week, I think they're out.
Rocco, we'll keep it with you before we go back to Lukas. Anything to add on any of these additional teams out in the West
Yes.
region that you want to comment on?
Yes. So my original reaction at the very start when you did the Utah State BYU, it was about that rivalry because I know how crazy those people will get after each other. I was just on BYU radio about an hour ago talking about it. So anyway, that was exciting to see. But yeah, and I am one that put Tennessee ahead today, but I also didn't lose any sleep over it. You know why? Any idea? Okay, I'll tell you. Alabama plays Florida Wednesday night, and they go to Auburn on Saturday. Alabama's going to control their own destiny. And for that matter, Florida, we haven't got to yet, but I'll say this now. Florida controls their own destiny too. They go to Alabama, and they end with Ole Miss at home. If either of those teams go 2-0 this week, they're getting on the one line. So Tennessee's the team kind of sitting back and watching. They have to go to Ole Miss. That's another hard game for them. You can pencil Tennessee in there for today. Whether it's Tennessee or Alabama, either way, they're the last one seed. They're going to the West. They're going to Lexington, and that protects BYU.
Lukas, what do you have to add on the West region and what all we've seen?
I think it's pretty straightforward in terms of what we've seen. I had no issues really with much of the seeding across the board here. This region, I think, pretty rock solid. I do have Wisconsin down to a 3 seed after they lost to Michigan State. I moved Iowa State up to that 2 seed line, especially because they played better since they got Milan back, and you put things into more perspective of Wisconsin not having really the top end wins of some of the other teams in the mix with just 2 Quadrant 1A wins, and their metrics are now behind Iowa State, who also has just 2 Quadrant 1A wins, where Iowa State's a top 10 team across the 3 quality metrics. Wisconsin's outside of that margin. They average at 13th right now, just a narrow margin. I gave Iowa State the edge for a 2 seed, but Wisconsin is certainly still in that mix on the 2-3 lines.
Yeah, a lot of good stuff there. All right, we're going to take a quick break here on Fielding the 68. Our breaks are brought to you by our friends at Rhythm. Whether you're a seasoned bettor or aiming to dominate your college basketball betting, March Madness pool, NBA, golf, and more, Rhythm gives you the competitive edge. You can identify mid-majors and underdogs that can upset the field and shake up your bracket. Don't wait. Download Rhythm today and transform how you bet, bracket, and enjoy college basketball. The full bracket reveal here on Fielding the 68 continues on the other side as we reveal the East and Midwest region and get Rocco and Lukas's analysis. Stick with us.
College basketball fans, are you ready to take your hoops game to a new level? Whether you're a seasoned bettor or just trying to win your March Madness office pool, Rhythm is here to give you the edge this season. With data-driven predictions for every single college basketball game left on the schedule, Rhythm helps you maximize your bets. And as March Madness kicks off, Rhythm's insights will help you spot those plucky Cinderellas that you know are going to shake up the NCAA tournament. But that's not all. When Selection Sunday rolls around, let Rhythm's AI-powered bracket generator do the heavy lifting for you. This is the same AI tool that performed 35% better than the average ESPN bracket last year. And here's the best part. Rhythm pairs perfectly with our Field of 68 expert analysis, giving you the 1-2 punch that you need for the rest of the college basketball season. So don't wait. Download Rhythm today and get ready to see college basketball and your betting results in a whole new light.
We welcome you back into Fielding the 68, brought to you by Rhythm. I'm Faxon Childress alongside Lukas Harkins and Rocco Miller. You're part of the full bracket reveal here today on the show, having a lot of fun with it and going through everybody's favorite matchups. Everybody's seeing where their team is falling on seed lines. So let's hop right back into it with the East region. Rocco, we'll go to you first here in Newark, New Jersey. Obviously, we're running out of 1 seed, so we know Duke's coming up at some point, and there they are, staying in the East. They'll play the winner of Quinnipiac and Southeast Missouri State, and then Gonzaga, maybe the biggest case study of where they'll be seeded. We've got them at the 8 seed, facing off against Mark Bylinton's Commodores as the 9. This is a really intriguing pod, Rocco. What are your thoughts?
No doubt. Yeah, well, I'll start with Gonzaga. Saturday night was a lot of fun. They were here in San Francisco. I was covering it, and after the game, I talked to Ryan Nemhard, who apparently watches Fielding the 68. So let's give ourselves a pat on the back because he asked me where they were seated, and when I said it was a 9 seed before tip-off, he stormed off and said, "We'll see about that 9 seed." Well, Ryan, we got you an 8. I hope you're happy. No, it It's funny, though. I think with Gonzaga, they clearly played their best basketball last week, blowing out Santa Clara, blowing out San Francisco, count as both quad one games. The reality is they're still sitting there at 8-8 in their top two quad games. Clearly, behind the 8 ball in quad one with a 3-6 record. And the 3 wins against the field are all bubblish teams. The blowout over Baylor, the win at San Diego State, and the neutral court win over Indiana. So they just don't have, they missed out barely in the UCLA loss. They lost to UConn. And that's the other problem, because I'm, from a performance standpoint, I'm prepared to put the Bulldogs higher. They obviously have a much higher ceiling than an 8 seed, a typical 8 seed, but they lost head-to-head to UCLA. So I'm at a point where I can't put them ahead of UCLA, because UCLA has 7 wins against the field. They won at Oregon. They won at Indiana instead of a neutral court. They beat Gonzaga and Arizona. So they're just kind of stuck. But it all comes down to the WCC tournament, and they get a bye to the semis. If Gonzaga goes there, cuts down the nets, beats St. Mary's in the finals, I think they're going to work their way up to a 6 with an upside of a 5, just the way things tend to shake out. It will help their resume numbers that are really the ones that are dragging them down, plus some of those records I mentioned. And the really good news about the WCC, I say this every year, but just a reminder, all the hay will be in the barn, whereas these other teams that they get compared against, the committee will actually be meeting and voting while those teams are just getting their tournament started. But by the time they actually sit down and meet, the WCC will all be done. So all the Gonzaga results will be accounted for from their conference tournament. And that's much different than these other teams they get compared against. And I think that helps them.
It's a good point in providing a little bit of additional context there, Rocco. And saw you got the chance to be out at the Chase Center this past weekend. That looked absolutely electric, as Gonzaga looked very convincing over a good San Francisco team that was on the bubble as well. Lukas, we're throwing things to you for this next pod here in the East Region. It'll be 4-seed Purdue against 13-seed Lipscomb, and then 5-seed St. Mary's against 12-seed McNeese State, and what would surely be a defensive and physical battle. What are your thoughts on this pod?
Yeah. Purdue hasn't been particularly good recently. They're just 1-3 since the bracket preview. But the bracket preview, they got a 2. So I think that they're in a position where they can still be in the 3-4 kind of mix. And obviously a home win over UCLA on Friday night helped that as well. Purdue's resume is still in pretty good shape, 14-9 against the upper 2 quadrants. They're top 15 on average in resume and in quality. That probably puts them still in the mix for a 4 seed. No really bad losses to their name, only 1 in quadrant 2, nothing in quad 3 or 4. As you flip down to the 5 seed line in St. Mary's, we talked about Gonzaga being a team that could get a seed boost for being in the bank and earning interest already after the WCC tournament. Same could be the case for St. Mary's, although they're going to have to beat Gonzaga a 3rd time to make that happen. 2 wins already against the Bulldogs this season has certainly helped a resume that is extremely clean. 10-4 against the upper 2 quadrants, top 28 against in every single metrics, top 24 in all but 1. No bad losses. I think they're in great shape. Although whoever gets McNeese is not going to be thrilled if McNeese is in fact the Southland champion when it comes down to it. McNeese has only lost once since December 15th. As for Lipscomb, enjoy tonight. A-Sun tournament's the only one on so far.
Yeah, good stuff there as always. Lukas, let's take a look at the next pod here now in the East Region. Rocco, will throw it back to you for Iowa State versus Utah Valley in the 3-14, and then Memphis versus the winner of Boise State and Nebraska in the 6-11. Know the group chat was texting about that Boise State-Fresno State game this past weekend. A lot to break down in this pod, Rocco.
There is, yeah. Well, yeah, first of all, on the bubble teams, Boise State versus Nebraska in Dayton. That's where I landed. They were not my last teams in, but they were close. And so, yeah, it makes a lot of sense based on where they stand. I think Boise State, on the good side, they have 4 wins against the field, beating St. Mary's in the middle of Idaho Falls for the 2nd straight year. Certainly helps a lot. Beating Clemson, New Mexico, and Utah State at home. The good news about the 4 is 2 of those were not Mountain West games. And I think having non-conference mix for Mountain West teams is really important. That's what we've learned from previous committees. And I think the other stuff, they're a little behind. Like their overall resume numbers due to losses to Boston College and Washington State are still dragging them down into the mid-50s. But I think there's enough there to include the Boise State Broncos. They're 7-6 in all of Quad 2. That measures out better than most. And, so we're good there. In Nebraska's case, they're 11-12 in what I call meaningful games. If you're a game under 500, you use some road juice to get in, and they've got the road juice. They won at Oregon. They won at Creighton. That helps tremendously in this situation. They sprinkled in some road wins against Northwestern and Washington, and also in Quad 2 to just assist that. Northwestern's actually Quad 1, but you know what I'm saying. And they're 7-7 away from Lincoln, still good enough. But like I said at the start of the show, home losses to Minnesota, USC, and Rutgers, really, really difficult. The rest of the bracket, I would say Memphis. I have a lot of respect for what they did in non-conference. It's really difficult to go through their own league where their teams scout them even better than anybody in non-conference did. They're going to take some losses. They did, but very impressive win at UAB yesterday, and they make it onto the 6th line. That's an improvement from last week. And with Iowa State, their big win over Arizona made it pretty easy to bump them back up to the 3 line. Utah Valley's feisty. That'll be a good matchup in the first round.
And wrapping up the East region now with Lukas, a lot going on in this bottom section with Illinois, West Virginia, Florida, and Norfolk State. Illinois, I guess the question is, are they going to shoot better than 27% from 3? More times than not, you're going to get the win with that number. Lukas, I'll let you have the floor on that note.
Yeah, I think Illinois' back-to-back wins now over Iowa at home by 20 and then over Michigan. Michigan on the road by 20 have put them back into that outside of the 8-9 range. I think they put themselves back towards a 7, and they get a home chance against Purdue on Friday night. They can really assure themselves of winning 8-9. And as I mentioned earlier, that's really a thing that's more important this year than I think it is in other years, especially because while the top 6 are really good, if you can land one of the bottom 2 seeds, that's certainly an advantage over having to face one of the top 6 teams right now, at least in my opinion. Speaking of those top 6, there's Florida, as Rocco already talked about, a team that can still control its own destiny for a potential 1 seed. They go at Alabama and then get Ole Miss at home, and then obviously the SEC tournament provides more opportunities than any conference tournament there is in the country. West Virginia just kind of continues to hang around. They've alternated wins or losses, it seems like, for an entire month now. But 5 Quadrant 1A wins gives them an edge over other teams in the double-digit speed lines right now. They're a team that still gets selection, and then once they get selected, they're a team kind of like Baylor that you look at a little bit deeper in terms of their quality metrics are pretty solid, and their top-end wins are really, really strong.
Lukas, we'll stay with you and then throw it back to Rocco. Wrapping things up here in this region. Anything else to add on a team that might have not been in your pod, or just general thoughts on the region?
I was right with Rocco. I think Rocco mentioned that Boise State and Nebraska were his first 2 teams in Dayton. They were his 11 seeds. They are for me too. They're exactly there. They're my 3rd and 4th to last teams in the field. Both teams really close. I think that today I was pretty much down to about 8 teams for the last 4 spots, and they were 2 of those teams that got the edge. Boise State, as Rocco mentioned, they don't really have the resume metrics of other teams, and that's one that could really keep them on the outside looking in. With that said, though, the win over Clemson continues to look good. The win over St. Mary's continues to look good, and they will get another chance at home against Colorado State, which I think would be an underrated victory if they can take that one heading into the Mountain West tournament. Where I think that if they go 2-0, they will be on the right side of the cut line going into the Mountain West tournament, which is all you can really hope for a bubble team.
Rocco, anything else to add here in the East region before we shift gears and conclude our full bracket review?
Yeah, so Boise, really similar to you, Lukas. They were actually my 2nd and 3rd, the last teams in, with the first team in Dayton being Indiana. But yeah, close enough. They're right. We're kind of all on the same page with those 2, Boise State and Nebraska I'm talking about. And then I also wanted to just comment on St. Mary's. I did have them as a 5 on Friday, but I did think the Maryland picked up a road win at Penn State. It's a quad 1 win. And, it was a close battle between Maryland and St. Mary's for me for that last 5 seed. I ultimately went with the Terps. But again, St. Mary's, like I said about Gonzaga earlier, the WCC tournament will be entirely done by the time the committee starts making votes. So if St. Mary's cuts down the nets in Vegas, I feel very strongly they'll be a 5 seed.
Yeah, I guess with the St. Mary's point, We'll shout out Brad for St. Mary's, because I think now if you have them on the 6th seed, Rocco, so do I. So them landing on the 5 is either an overall average, or we might have Brad being really high in the Gills right now.
It must be.
Yeah, it's got to be the case. And always funny when y'all kind of put 2 and 2 together about where other people are aligning people. So
it was harder in past years, but when there's only 3 of us, 2 of us are on the show.
Right. That's a great point. All right, let's talk Midwest region here in Indianapolis. Obviously, if your team hasn't been called and you're a lock, now is your time. Lukas, we can start with you here. Houston, Bryant, UConn, and New Mexico. This would be a pod with some fireworks to start things out.
Yeah, I mean, Houston has earned itself the spot on the 1 seed line. They've played extremely well in Big 12 play. They've racked up quality wins. Their resume metrics and quality metrics are both really strong. I think they're definitely a step ahead of those teams that are really contending for the last 1 seed right now. I have Houston in good shape, especially since the bracket preview. They've been great. Since the bracket preview, they've won at Arizona State, Iowa State at home, at Texas Tech, and beat Cincinnati at home. I think they put themselves in great shape for a 1 seed coming into a closing stretch with Kansas at home, Baylor on the road. I think they control their own destiny for a 1 seed. UConn still 3-1 against in Quad 1A games this season. I think they're a team that no one wants to see on the 8-9 line, in particular because of that championship pedigree they've had. But they also haven't done a whole lot to move up recently. Last 2 games are a home win over Georgetown, road win over Providence. They aren't really needle movers, but a home game against Marquette this week is a potential one. If they want to get off the 8-9 line, that's definitely an opportunity to do so. As for New Mexico, handled their business against Air Force after back-to-back losses against Boise State and San Diego State. Coming into a closing stretch at Nevada versus UNLV, they should be safe, probably as a single-digit seed. I think they put themselves in a pretty good spot.
Rocco, we'll throw things to you for the next pod of teams here in the Midwest region out in Indianapolis. A really intriguing matchup between Michigan and Yale, and the same to be said about Clemson and Drake in the 5-12. What are your thoughts?
Well, how about that, Faxon? We've got a Danny Wolf special, baby. Yeah, I mean, this would be an incredibly scouted game. If you know the Yale program under Coach Jones, and obviously Dusty May, an incredible schemer and game planner, if we actually got this matchup, they would be taking away everything they love to do. Yale would be taking away all of Danny Wolf's strengths, and vice versa. Danny Wolf would have Michigan's entire team studied up on their arsenal of shooters. It would be so fun just from a strategy standpoint. Yale, as a team, you know, they had an opportunity to jump up to a 12 seed. They've been cruising in the Ivy League. They ran into their rival Harvard and slipped up in a game. Harvard, of course, was incredibly motivated to win. And that cost them, because Liberty did lose to Kennesaw State yesterday, and that was a chance for Yale to go to a 12. They stay on the 13, and now guess what? We get the Danny Wolf Bowl. Beautiful. On to the other matchup, Clemson-Drake. Clemson, for me, Faxon, good news. I have them all the way up to number 17, so they're right there knocking on the door for the protected seed. I think the biggest issue is they don't have that one big road win away from home to kind of slam the door on it, but all their numbers are really good. They're playing extremely well, and it's just a matter of being bogged down in a conference where they have to play, you know, a lot of quad 2 and 3 ball games. For Drake, we touched on a little earlier. I have them they're above 3 of the teams that are going to Dayton. So I would say they're above Boise State, Nebraska, and my last team who has not been talked about yet. So I'll leave them as a mystery. But I think with Drake, they're about as safe as could be based on where they're at, because all their resume stuff is excellent. They've won 27 ball games, which is a huge number. And they beat Vanderbilt by 11 in a very important game, a championship game of the Charleston Classic. If there's a world where Drake doesn't get in, I don't even want to watch this sport anymore. So Drake's good to go.
Yeah, good stuff there, Rocco. And on the Clemson front, you're telling me that the Boston College game on Wednesday isn't a big road win opportunity?
Unfortunately, no. But they've knocked off some tournament teams as we've noticed here.
Yeah, for sure. It's a down year for the ACC in all seriousness, and that's really been the big issue for Clemson, as you alluded to, with the upward mobility on the seed lines. It's just limited opportunity on the road in league play thus far. Let's shift gears to the next pod and talk to Lukas about what we're seeing here. You got St. John's against the Chattanooga Mocs, one of the best stories in sports down in the SoCon, with Dan Earl coming from VMI a couple years ago. He's got his guards in his backcourt of Honor Huff and Trey Bonham. They're electric. That's a really good team. And then Oregon and UC San Diego. This would be an electric matchup as well. Lukas, are you loving this pod as much as I am from an entertainment perspective?
Well, it's certainly fun. Can't argue with that. There's a lot of pods that should we get them in a couple weeks from now we'll be really excited about. I think seed-wise, St. John's, all it's done since the bracket preview is win. They were the 16th overall team, last 4 seed at the bracket preview. Since then, they haven't really done a whole lot in terms of like top-end wins, but home wins over Creighton and UConn, coupled with road wins at DePaul and Butler. They've just kind of continued to win games while other teams have dropped, and that's moved them up to the 3 seed line. They go at Marquette on Saturday. They're going to have a whole week to prepare for that one. Big opportunity to what I think would probably solidify their spot as a 3. On the 6, Oregon, they've really bounced back. 5-game losing streak. They've bounced back now with 5 straight wins, including a road one at Wisconsin. I have them up as a 5 right now. I think their sheer number of quality wins is worthy of that. For the season this year, Oregon is 8-6 in Quadrant 1 games. 5 of those wins are in Quadrant 1A. They have top 16 resume metrics, but if you really want to dive into if their seeding could be impacted by anything negatively, it's just ranking barely in the top 36 across quality metrics. So I think they could see a drop because of that, but the quality wins are there. They're a pretty similar case to Memphis in that they have really, really great resume numbers, but not great quality numbers, although their quality numbers are better than that of Memphis right now. Looking at UC San Diego, I'm not nearly as high on Drake as Rocco is, and I'm also probably not as high on UC San Diego. I'm always hesitant with these odds for mid-major teams, whether or not it should be, but I think that it's always tricky to get these teams in the field, and I think that they would be an at-large team for me right now. But I think the biggest thing for UC San Diego is if they don't win the Big West tournament, where they see if they're not on the board in the first region or two. Take a quick look at where the Mountain West teams have ended up out there. Because while their win over Utah State on the road is going to stay Quadrant 1, that's not going anywhere. Utah State's big loss is certainly hindered how quality that win potentially looks for UC San Diego, who also lost on the road to San Diego State. Those are 2 of their biggest games this season. They went 1-1 in. How the committee views the Mountain West could have a pretty big impact in how the committee views UC San Diego. So I think that that's a connection to potentially watch when we get to Selection Sunday, should they need it. And for UC San Diego, who hasn't lost since January 18th and just coming off a 45-point home win over Cal State Fullerton, they're playing really well and hopefully won't have to worry about that come Selection Sunday.
Rocco, we're throwing things back to you for the final pod of the Midwest region and the final pod of our full bracket reveal with Kansas, San Diego State, Tennessee, and Robert Morris. What do you see, Rocco?
Yeah, it looks pretty in line. I was a little surprised this morning. San Diego State fell to my best 11 seed for the first time the whole season today. Nothing that they did particularly wrong. It's just some of the teams that are once they're selected, like your Baylors and your Georgias of the world, are quite easily passing them based on a lot of their performance numbers. And I feel good enough about San Diego State's resume. Obviously, the win over Houston helps tremendously, and they have Creighton in there and some good Mountain West wins. But interesting times for Kansas to be a 7 seed. I think that just probably looks funny to people, but that's really where they belong. In fact, some of it, if it wasn't for the BPI loves the Jayhawks. They're still number 12. But that could be picked apart. We don't have all day for that. But yeah, I think 7's a safe estimate for where they are. This isn't the worst draw in the world for them either. I think Jayhawk fans would be okay with it. Tennessee, we talked about already with their 1-2 split. You could put them as a 1 now, but they're really at the mercy of whatever Alabama and Florida do. The good news for Tennessee is somebody has to lose the Alabama-Florida game on Wednesday. So there might still be a path for them. And they have a big road game at Ole Miss coming up themselves. So really interesting times for them. Robert Morris, one of the best stories in the country. Horizon League tournament starting later this week. Don't miss it.
Yeah, should be good stuff in the Horizon League tournament as well. Rocco, we'll stay with you. Anything to add on this Midwest region before we take a quick break and then talk bubble on the other side?
Yeah, we had Chattanooga as our 14 seed, and I would say the Mocs are one of the strongest 14s I've ever seen, but it's just kind of how the stack rankings are working with all these projected tournament champions. Obviously, in some of those leagues above them, there's going to be upsets. That almost always happens. So if you're a Chattanooga fan, don't freak out. If you guys go win the SoCon tournament, you're on a hot streak right now. There's pretty much no chance you would be lower than a 13. And if you get absolute carnage around you, you might even land as a 12. So just a warning for Chattanooga fans, don't freak out today.
Yeah, definitely excited to see the SoCon tournament up in Asheville. That's always one that provides fireworks. Lukas, anything else to add to the Midwest region?
Yeah, I think Rocco hinted at Tennessee just kind of being if you put it on the 1 seed line, no one's going to argue with you, and I think that's certainly the case. I think right now you can certainly make an argument as Tennessee as a 1 seed. If you put them there, I don't think anyone is going to be upset about it over Alabama. And as we'll figure it out, I think they'll figure out this SEC jumble between Bama, Tennessee, and Florida over the next week and a half. With that said, maybe Tennessee doesn't want to go west. Maybe a 2 seed's not so bad.
That's a fair point. All right, we're going to take a quick break here on Fielding the 68, and our breaks are brought to you by our friends at Rhythm. Whether you're a seasoned bettor aiming to dominate your college basketball betting, March Madness pool, NBA, golf, and more, Rhythm gives you the competitive edge. You can access expert-backed predictions for every remaining college basketball game, from rivalries to sleeper matchup. Don't wait. Download Rhythm today and transform how you bet, bracket, and enjoy college basketball. We're going to be talking games to watch and bubble on the other side of a quick break here on Fielding the 68. Stick with us.
If you haven't heard by now, we have partnered with BetMGM for the season. We'll be using BetMGM lines to make all of our picks, and we'll have special offers for the listeners and the viewers. Download the BetMGM app and sign up using the bonus code FIELD. Deposit at least $10 and place your first wager on any game, and you'll receive up to $1,500 in bonus bets. Go download the BetMGM app and use the code FIELD today.
Final segment of the program here on Fielding the 68, brought to you by our friends at Rhythm. I'm Faxon Childress alongside Rocco Miller and Lukas Harkins. It's been a blast doing the full bracket reveal today. Hope you guys have enjoyed watching along at home, and some good stuff throughout the course of the program. It's time now to get into the nuances of bubble talk and hear from our bracketologist a little bit more reasoning and rationale with what has gone into the consensus here at Fielding the 68 for the teams that are currently on the bubble. So let's hop right into it here in the final segment of the program and talk last four in. We're going to reveal the consensus last four in, which is Boise State, Nebraska, Ohio State, and Xavier. Lukas, we can start with you here. Talk to me a little bit about what you see in this last four in.
Yeah, I have 3 of these teams in the field in their exact spots. I have Boise State, Nebraska, and Ohio State, precisely 3 of my last 4 teams in the field right now. I think I feel pretty good about Boise State and Nebraska being teams that would be in the field today. I think I ended up with them being a touch higher than those last 2 spots, obviously in the rankings, but I also have a little bit of a gap there between Ohio State then. Ohio State is I'm sure Rocco will get into the 10 and 13 record in quadrant 1A and quadrant 1, 2, 3 games this season. But they just have those 2 tremendously good wins away from home. And if they are going to get into the field, they still have the quality metrics that paint them as a top 35 team in the country. That helps. When you compare teams that have very similar resumes and very similar resume numbers, then maybe you dive into those quality metrics a bit more. And that's where Ohio State has a bit of an edge. I'll let Rocco take the bolt on Xavier getting in the field. They are my second team out right now. I just think that 1-9 record in Quadrant 1 is really, really difficult to overcome.
Yeah, Rocco, what say you here on the last 4 in and on the Musketeers?
Yeah, I think we covered Nebraska and Boise pretty well during the reveal. On the Musketeers, I would say, it's a team you can take right now if you need a team. I'm not 100% sold they're there quite yet, but I do think they have a favorable rest of the season, and as long as they keep winning to finish the year, they're going to land there. I'm pretty confident that you have the Georgetown athletic director on the committee. You have Stu Jackson on the committee from the WCC. So you basically have two Big East voices in the room, and all of my work is centered on what I think the committee is going to do. So as long as Xavier's sitting around this position, I feel like they'll find a home for them. The real reason we're putting them in is because they got a road win at Marquette. And when you're looking around the bubble, it's hard to find a team with a road win like that. And now they back it up with wins over UConn and Creighton, two more teams solidly in the field. And a team like Wake Forest is close enough. So it's like they're 4-6 if you take those four against tournament level competition. That can help to start overcoming the 1-9 Q1. But yeah, their road records are not great. They're 5-8 away from the Cintas Center. They're 2-7 in those games in the top two quads on the road. So you don't like any of that. So yeah, I definitely can see the argument against them. Right now, they're just not better options in my opinion. And then on Ohio State, I think, obviously I bang on the record stuff all the time, but it's more than that for me on the Buckeyes. It's the fact that they've lost at home 6 times. I mean, I can't remember a team ever losing that many times at home and getting in. That's a really bad look. And I also think, obviously the surplus of losses. And again, the Buckeyes have it all right in front of them. They play Nebraska and they play Indiana this week. If they go 2-0, there'll be plenty of reasons to justify them getting back in. But for me, they're still pretty far out.
Yeah, definitely differing opinions on Ohio State amongst our 3 bracketologists. And they're one of the more interesting case studies, right? Because I feel like there's valid points from people on both sides relating to the Buckeyes. And at the end of the day, you got to go out there and handle business in the regular season. You got to go out there and handle business in the conference tournament. So if they're good enough to get in, they should be able to showcase that down the stretch in the regular season and in the conference tournament. Let's take a look now at the first 4 out by the consensus. Arkansas, the first team out after a couple rough performances. Oklahoma, Wake Forest, North Carolina, 2 SEC, 2 ACC. Rocco, will come to you first for this one. How are you seeing the first 4 out as of right now?
Yeah, sure. So with Arkansas, they're behind the 8 ball in terms of wins again. They just had a really ugly last impression in a pretty embarrassing loss at South Carolina. Now, I know South Carolina is a great home team. Faxon, you're right there in South Carolina. You understand that. But to lose the way they did, really, really bad taste in the mouth. But more so, this is a body of work exercise. They're once again behind the 8 ball when it comes to the total record at 10-12 when you take away their quad 4 results. Obviously, you love the win at Kentucky. The wins over Michigan and Missouri are really good wins. And I think a 2-0 finish, they're right back in. I think the problem from that for them is a 1-1. They'll be right back where they are today. So that's what's in front of Arkansas. With Oklahoma, very similar, just similar but different. Oklahoma's got the crazy story: 13-0 non-conference, just 4-12 in conference. And Oklahoma has something, a little less obvious maybe to most. But I'll say it, I don't think an at-large team's ever been selected without more than 1 road win. And right now they just have 1 win at Arkansas. So that puts Oklahoma's entire season on the line against Mississippi State, their last road game. And if they get it, they'll be very interesting. I think if they do that and finish with a win over Texas, they're back in, and they'll be the first 6-12 conference team in history to make it to the tournament. But that's why they need a win out. I don't think 5-13 is justifiable, even if you're Greg Sankey. So that's where they stand. It's just too much losing, way too much losing. North Carolina, I would say for them, you could take them. You have to really plug your nose. But I think with their finishing schedule, they got to win that home Duke game. If they lose that game, I'll tell you what, they'll be 1-11 in quad one because they're 1-10 right now. So what's the point in choosing them now until they prove to you they can do that? And then who's our last team? Who was our fourth?
Wake Forest.
It was Arkansas, Oklahoma, Wake Forest, North Carolina.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm the punk who put Wake Forest in today. I don't love it, but I do think the ACC is going to get a fourth team. I said that last week about the SMU inclusion. And Wake Forest, 4 right now. Obviously, you don't love their profile. We really need a bid stealer. But they are 7-6 against the top 2 quadrants. They have 3 decent to good road wins, winning at SMU, Stanford, and Cal. They're in the top 2 quads at least. They're 8-6 away from Winston-Salem. So, and they're number 41 in the strength of resume, which if you're going to pick a metric, that's the one that's probably been most heavily leaned on by the committee. All that stuff works for them right now, but I really hope this spot gets gobbled up by somebody else.
Lukas, we'll throw things to you now for our first 4 out. Obviously, 2 ACC teams there in Wake Forest and North Carolina. They've got 2 different tails, and then 2 SEC teams with pretty similar tails, if you will, in Arkansas and Oklahoma.
Yeah, Wake Forest, I think for a while, as Rocco indicated, that they were on the right side of the cut line due to those resume metrics. Those resume metrics are now down to an average of 46, which puts them right on the same level of the North Carolina, Arkansas, and Oklahoma. Like now they don't have that edge. The resume metrics are no longer 10 spots ahead of where those teams were. And as a result, they've fallen out of my field and towards that 4th team out. And I think that them and North Carolina right now, I have as a touch behind Arkansas, Xavier, and Oklahoma as those 3 teams, as my last 3 teams that are either in the field or first out right now. Oklahoma just still has 5 Quadrant 1 wins this season. You compare their 5-10 record in Quadrant 1 versus Xavier being 1-9. Like, they've had more opportunities, but for Xavier to match Oklahoma's 5-10 record, they'd have to win 4 of their next 5 Quadrant 1 games. That's something that they haven't really proven they're able to do. So I gave Oklahoma the edge still for now. I think in terms of their total quantity of losses, if they get to 13 losses, which would be 1 more, they go 1-1 on the stretch of the season. Is that much different from a Baylor team that's probably going to enter the Big 12 tournament at 18-13? Is that much different from Illinois, who could be in 20-12? Like, there's a lot of teams out there with a lot of losses right now, and I think if you mixed around Oklahoma's resume and take some of their great wins from non-conference and sprinkled them as conference wins, like let's say they don't beat Arizona on a neutral, but instead they beat Texas A&M on the road, like. They were 13-0 in non-conference with some really good wins along the way. I still think that puts them in the mix. Granted, as I've said several times on this show in the past, they are not trending in the direction you want them to be, and the odds they win one of their 2 final games are shrinking. And they need to win one of those games to remain on the right side of the field, if not both. So I think that there's certainly a lot of teams here that will figure things out, whether that be Oklahoma, Xavier, or Arkansas, who have opportunities remaining. But as Rocco indicated, he is dead on the money that a bid stealer would be fantastic for us making brackets right now, or 2 or 3. In terms of if someone wants to win the American outside of Memphis, if someone wants to win the A-10 out of VCU, I don't think any of us would be complaining in terms of trying to project what the committee will do, because it gets really, really nasty here towards the last couple spots.
Yeah, and, staying consistent with that theme, let's just go ahead and rip the Band-Aid off. Consensus next 4 out here. So if it wasn't already nasty, SMU still without a quad 1 win. They could have an opportunity if they play themselves far enough in the ACC tournament. UC Irvine, Cincinnati, and the San Francisco Dons, who really had a great opportunity at the Chase Center this past weekend. And unfortunately, Gonzaga gave them the hammer. Rocco, we'll start with you. Yeah. Next 4 out, is there any team that you see on your screen in front of you that you feel like has a realistic chance of playing their way in at this juncture?
Yeah, there's a couple, and it's maybe even teams not even on the list right here. I was close today. I think if I was voting, I would vote to, instead of Wake Forest, I'd vote to put UC Irvine in. I love that all the road wins they have. They're 15-3 away from home. They have the road win at UC San Diego. My own prediction of the committee, I just don't think they'll respect the road win as much because it was in the conference. instead of them going to, and they didn't. The only big chance they had was Oregon State, and they lost that game for like a bigger school road game. But they did a lot of great damage, winning at UC San Diego, winning at Northern Iowa, winning at CSUN, who's a top 100 team, winning at Belmont. And, I want 25-plus win teams in the tournament. I don't want 14, 15, 16 lost teams. It's just it's very uninteresting. So that's just my own opinion. That's why I'm proving to you, Faxon, I don't go off my opinion. I go off of what I think the committee's going to do. And, San Francisco, it was unfortunate. Ryan Beasley took a bad injury, so it made matters worse. Their chances of getting to the WCC final probably went down a little bit. But obviously we want the best for the Dons. We'll see how that goes next week. Cincinnati, to me, I think they're drawing dead. They're 2-9 against the field. Their only wins are BYU and Xavier at home. They needed a big road win. They had the chance against Houston. It's obviously a brutal chance. They actually played pretty well, lost by 9, but I just don't see a path now for the Bearcats. And then the two I wanted to mention that are kind of off the radar, both TCU and Northwestern, if they finish 2-0 this week, I think they've got a somewhat of an interesting resume. We don't have to go in the weeds on that, but just look at their remaining schedules. I just don't think you can write those two off quite yet.
Lukas, anything to add on next 4 out, or maybe even a team, as Rocco was alluding to, that we haven't seen on the list that you feel like has a chance to play themselves in down the stretch?
Yeah, I think I still have Northwestern and TCU right in the mix. They aren't in my next 4 group after that. There's certainly teams I'm watching. Northwestern's a team I got on my bubble watch circled in red because they play tonight. There's certainly a team that I'm still monitoring as well. If I had to mention 2 that weren't in our next 4 out, but are in my next 4 out, right now, I already talked about Colorado State. Obviously had that big home win over Utah State. They still get Boise State on the road. That'd be another opportunity. They beat TCU on a neutral floor earlier this season. So if you're going to play a head-to-head game there late, that's something that they could have an edge. If you're going to consider them a tournament level type of team, should TCU draw closer to the field, that could be an edge for Colorado State. I still think they have a shot there, and especially because there are really some solid opportunities for quality wins now. In the Mountain West tournament, because for now, San Diego State's 50th in the net, Boise State's 43rd, Utah State's 38th, and New Mexico is 44th. All 4 of those games, should Colorado State play them, would be quadrant 1 in the Mountain West tournament. That gives them the opportunity. The other team that I'll note is Villanova. Again, a team that needs help and needs to play well in the Big East tournament in order to have a run. But what Villanova has done already this season is they've beaten most of the top teams in the Big East. They beat UConn, they beat St. John's, they beat Marquette. So they've proven they can beat those top teams. Should they get them in the Big East tournament, they could potentially make a run. They're already a top 50 team by quality metrics. Work to do, but certainly a team that has proven it can beat the teams that will then have to beat again to make a push towards the field.
Floor open for both of y'all before we go games to watch and get out of here. Anything to add related to the bubble that you feel like we haven't covered in the full reveal and in this segment?
Yeah, I mean, I think teams like SMU and Texas are dead. I just don't think there's a path anymore for those two. SMU finishes with Syracuse at home, does nothing for them, and at Florida State, which is actually a brutal one because it's Leonard Hamilton's last game, so they might take another loss there. Florida State will be very excited for that game. And SMU, quite honestly, I didn't love putting them in at all last week. It was just I'm sort of impressed by the collection of road wins they have been able to do so far away from Dallas in their weird realignment league they're part of now. But I think you can cross them off the list. And, that's pretty much what we're going to be doing here day in and day out. That's what I want to kind of finish with is – the best part of the bubble for guys like Lukas and I is most of the bubble is going to play themselves out, and whoever can just step up and get a win or two. And that's why teams like perhaps a TCU or Northwestern or even a Colorado State who plays at Boise this Friday can kind of reemerge and jump a bunch of teams because they're on the bubble for a reason. They're not very consistent, and we're just looking for a couple teams that really want to play in March Madness.
Lukas, anything to add on the bubble front before we talk games to watch?
Not really. I think Ohio State's that team that I think Rocco and I are going to have an argument about up until the final end here. So I think they're the trickiest team of any bubble team to evaluate right now. So I think if you're circling a team that is going to be very, very hard to figure out, Ohio State's probably that team.
Yeah, I feel like that's more than fair. All right, fellas, we can stick with you, Lukas. Games to watch as we go around the horn before we get out of here.
Well, obviously, there's a bunch of them coming down the stretch of the season here. But that's, Baylor goes at TCU. Big chance for TCU to pick up that one. Nebraska at Ohio State is a huge game. Both teams kind of hinging on the bubble territory. Arkansas goes at Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt's played really, really well lately. Arkansas has not, and they're gonna have to go win in Memorial Gym to really stay in the right on the cut line kind of mix. Indiana goes at Oregon, a big chance. There's a ton of bubble teams that are in action this week, not to mention those conversations that we had about the SEC teams at the top that are contending for 1 seeds. Let's be honest, these are all games that are in the regular season that matter. Let's talk about, we already have the ASUN tournament going on. Conference tournaments are picking up. Every single game right now is important and fun. This is the time of year that we practice for and get prepared for all year, right?
Yeah, that is true. Rocco, games to watch. Obviously, a couple big ones on the slate tonight on the bubble, and then a lot throughout the course of the week as well.
Yeah, I mean, just to come back to this SEC situation, the 1 seed is going to be heavily dramatic. Florida at Alabama Wednesday night sets the tone, but also Tennessee at Ole Miss. A big part of that, and Houston just has to keep winning. They got to go to Baylor at the end of the week. We'll preview that one again by the end of the week. But yeah, those are the big ones at the end of the rope. Tons of teams, in my opinion, on the bubble have to go 2-0 this week, so we'll get a chance to maybe cross some teams off if they lose this first one Tuesday, Wednesday. We already went through a lot of that. So just kind of anxious to see how it goes. And we'll be on this show. I think we're doing it 3 times a week pretty soon now. So we'll keep you posted, everybody.
Yeah, we'll definitely keep you posted. We did the full bracket reveal today on Fielding the 68. That'll be uploaded on social for you guys. Make sure to check that out at the Field of 68. So for Rocco Miller and Lukas Harkins, great job, guys, as always. I'm Faxon Childress saying so long. We will see you again soon here on Fielding the 68. Happy March, everybody. It's the best time of the year. Enjoy.